Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Addiction Help podcast, where we discuss the latest in news, sports, and entertainment as it pertains to addiction recovery, and mental health. I am your host, Dan Hauser. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime on the show, Jessica Miller, editorial director of addictionhelp.com. Jess, how's it going?
Pretty good. It's, as we know, we are recording from the past. And so it's Friday for me. I'm pretty stoked.
You going to play your fun nerdy games this weekend?
1,000%, Dan. I was actually looking last night because Nintendo, it shows you your hours played.
Oh, no.
100 hours. But I'm still, bills are paid, animals are taken care of, husband is not neglected. So,
Listen, you don't have to justify for me. The Heat and the Panthers both started their respective championship series since we recorded on Friday last night for Heat Game 1. So for the next anywhere from 10 to 16 days, my sleep is going to be all sorts of out of whack, and I couldn't be more excited about it. So I'm right there with you. Just same nerdy things, just different genre of nerdiness. So
yeah, heck yeah.
But anyway, we have a very exciting and interesting and different type of episode today. My sister-in-law, Leah Numbers, who is a fantastic and wonderful person, has been a listener of ours, a dedicated listener of ours from day one. She does not miss a single episode. The day it comes out, as soon as it drops, she's immediately listening to it. And she reached out to both of us actually recently and offered to come on this podcast and tell her story about her journey through addiction, mental health issues, and most importantly, sobriety. So that is going to be
rad.
Basically, not the meetup. That is going to be today's show. We are going to go ahead and talk to Leah, and she is going to share her truly amazing and inspiring story with us about everything from where her addiction started to her sobriety today and everything in between. So we're not going to bog you guys down with too much here on the front end because the interview is quite a long one. So we're just going to get right to it. And we hope you guys enjoy this interview that we did with Leah. So with us this week is a very, very special guest of ours that is joining the show, Leah Numbers. Full disclosure, off the front end of this, Leah is actually my sister-in-law. So she was one of the first ones to reach out after our pilot episode, saying how thrilled she was that we were doing this and how excited she was that this was a thing that was happening, and offered basically immediately to come on with us whenever we wanted and share her story with us. So we took her up on that offer this week, and she is here to share her story with us. So Leah, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Yes. Thank you for asking me to be here. It honestly, what you guys are doing is really incredible. And I've said to Dan before as well, I'll make this part short so we can get into it, but I'm just really appreciative of the insight that you both give, and especially Dan, and being in the same position that I'm in with addiction. It's really incredible to hear the insight and direction that's given in such a way that anybody can understand. So thank you guys for what you're doing.
It's a pleasure. Like we say often, even if this podcast only gets to one person and helps one person, done. Anything beyond that is a bonus.
Exactly. So just to jump kind of right in, Leah, if you kind of want to just share a little bit of your story for the audience, and then we'll kind of go from there, but at least kind of tell them a little bit about yourself, your background, your story
Who
overall.
are you, Leah? Because
exactly,
like you two know each other, but like we've just met. So
but honestly, I feel though like Dan knows me through my sister, but also, and even like us being around one another, but I don't know if before you guys launched this podcast, if he had a clue about me to the degree of, who I am and who I am now, especially, which, so where do I begin? I will start by saying addiction has infiltrated my life pretty heavily, numerous times in various different ways. Seeing it growing in my family, then the way it personally affected me. This is actually my third time being sober, and for the long haul, I can say to that it has. The difference this time is being that it was a genuine choice that I made, as opposed to like being backed into a corner or even, hitting the proverbial rock bottom, which I think it's easier for people on the outside to see what somebody else's rock bottom is, not necessarily the person going through it. So I just passed 2.5 years being sober, which was super exciting.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. The other 2 times I got sober, I made it to 2 years. So even when I hit my 2 years, it was a big deal. Or 2 years, 1 month, I should say. It was a pretty big deal.
Let's start at the beginning. So,
Yes.
and if there's, I know we kind of briefly talked about this like pre-meeting, and you were like, I'm an open book. If anything changes and you're like, I don't really feel like getting into that, just say so. We'll move on. It's not a big deal. Because I don't want to ask anything that's like triggering or inappropriate or anything like that as well,
I appreciate it.
So when did you first start really using any substance?
So I started drinking when I was 15 years old. It was PBR was the beginning. Yeah, living in the sticks. I mean, where we live isn't exactly the sticks, but everything around is. And in a small town, it was like bonfires and the parties and drinking like that. Looking back now, I see that I was destined for demise up until I got sober, only because it was so secretive. And for me, what's crazy to look back on when I began drinking and why I was so secretive was because I was able to drink around my parents. My parents always entertained, and it was kind of just normal. And but then
So
there was
very
also
like culturally
yeah.
acceptable, right? Okay.
But also they definitely said like you shouldn't drink, don't drink, because you're underage. It's the law. But being that I was around them, I understand it. I don't fault them. So
Sure.
yeah, so that's when it began.
And then did you notice, because I've heard this from different people, did you notice there was like an ongoing like slippery slope then, or was it just very casual for a while?
So it felt casual at the time. I can honestly remember that far back. Um, it felt casual at the time, but it was absolutely a slippery slope because not only was I drinking, but it was absolutely intertwined with my mental health. They both hit at the same time. So I was diagnosed at 15 years old with bipolar disorder, and then on top of drinking, that was a horrible mix, and then on top of being a 15-year-old girl dealing with body image issues.
Yeah.
So it was just everything all at once. And I didn't, it didn't feel like I got hit by a ton of bricks at the time. It was definitely like a slow lead into everything bad that happened after.
With because it's a common thing in the addiction world or addiction space as far as addiction and mental health and the correlation there. Did you find yourself early on turning to substances as a way of self-medicating, or because you were confused and were like, this just makes me feel better? Or was it just kind of a perfect storm of just a coincidence of it happening at the same time?
I think it was definitely very a conscious decision that I was making to drink because I didn't like the way I looked at myself, the way I felt about myself. I drank to make it all go away, to really genuinely numb myself.
Yeah.
Any chance I could. And I didn't understand my emotions at the time. I think that definitely had to do with, being bipolar. And even though I was in therapy, my parents especially supported me taking all the necessary steps to not have as hard of a time as I did. But I don't think any of us had a clue. I mean, I don't even think that, the professionals that I was getting help from had a clue, which also is attributed 95% to the fact that I was such a liar to everybody, even in therapy, because I thought that they would sell me out to my parents. So there just was a whole lot of dishonesty also intertwined in all that. So essentially it was the perfect storm, but I think I was very conscious of the reason that I was drinking.
That's interesting. Like, just to share a little bit of myself to kind of relate. I was diagnosed in my early 20s with generalized anxiety disorder. Um, obviously different, but some of the same symptoms. And for a lot of us, especially young girls, our symptoms don't start showing up until we're teenagers, which is so difficult because, that's already just such a very hard age with everything going on, like you mentioned, like body image issues and all kinds of stuff. And then your brain is doing things that I remember when it was my senior year of high school, and I genuinely thought I was losing it. And looking back, I can now see that it was, that's when a lot of times our symptoms really start to ramp up. But as you're a kid, you're trying to navigate this space, and then you add a substance to it that is, at the time, it seems like, it makes you look cool and it's helping you think, and so I can see for sure how easy it is to get seduced by that whole process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then how did things progress for you? Because I don't really know much about your story at all.
So things progressed. I mean, at that same time, I was also being that I was diagnosed, I was also put on antidepressants. I will say I got pretty lucky. I've never really felt like a guinea pig throughout my life when it comes to medication. So I'm very grateful for that. We happened to find a good combination of pharmaceutical drugs to help me at the time, but that that probably would have worked had I not been drinking. I really just thought I was like the smartest person in every room. And I had it all figured out because it's like, well, I'm going to therapy and I'm on medication and I'm checking all the boxes on the outside to everybody. But inside, it was like I just kept fumbling the ball. So for
So
me,
you knew in a way.
oh,
Do you
yeah,
think you were in denial at all? Or do you think you were just like
absolutely.
recklessly like, screw it, who cares?
I think I was absolutely in denial because something that I've recognized about myself as I've gotten older, and no matter what I'm going through, I've always been a very self-aware person. But the difference between who I am now and who I was back then was I just disregarded my self-awareness back then. It was like this little voice. I mean, essentially, the devil on your shoulder. And I was like, I'm just okay, that's great that you're saying all that. I don't care. And now it's like, wait, let's listen. Let's figure it out. Let's make sure I'm making good choices moving forward. But I think back at the time when I was that young and I was drinking, so much of it was I was embarrassed for, having mental health issues, let alone having to be on medication for it at such a young age.
Yep.
So for me, it became then, how do I live my life feeling good? Which in my head was from alcohol. And let's push all this other stuff. So the number of times I started and stopped medication, I know one of the other podcasts, Dan, when you shared, your story about starting and stopping, I was like, thank you so much for saying, don't do that, because it's also, I think it's a genuine miracle that I'm able to sit here and even tell any of this, because the combination of drugs that I was on mixed with the alcohol and then just starting and stopping and starting and stopping. I mean, I could have killed myself. And so, yeah, don't do that. Anybody
Especially
who's listening.
too,
Yeah.
like
Not only
combining
did I
with
do that,
alcohol and wow.
Yeah.
yeah, not only did I do that, I didn't bother to tell anyone I was doing it too. So that was just even like
So surprise.
surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did it secretively a few times. Like I would actually flush my meds. But then my parents, I think whether or not they picked up on it or if I was honest about it, because they had gotten my mom, I mean, I don't know if they were strategic about it. I look back and think that they were doing the right thing as far my mom would make us breakfast in the morning and she'd give me my pills. So she had some control over it. I don't think it was for the control, of it.
Probably
But it's
routine,
smart.
maybe. Yeah.
So yeah. And then after that, I think I didn't put as much emphasis on the fact that I actually had a drinking problem. For one, because I was underage. So it's like, well, it's not even legal for me to be doing this, therefore I don't have a problem.
Right.
But,
And
but
you
when
think like you're just being, it's your wild years, you
oh
think you're
yeah.
like mine were more in college, if you could even call it that. Like I'm, as evidenced by the stuffed animals I have in the background, like I'm a very soft, squishy person,
Yes.
so my wild years were not that wild, but you know what I mean? Like when you're just kind of chalking it up to, you know, like whatever. It's not good, but you think you're in control of it.
And honestly, because this sucks, and I think it happens. I think it's an age thing. Like everybody's doing it was the mentality, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, my friends are doing it. And of course, at that age, like you're, like you said, like you don't know yourself. You're trying to find yourself. So you're going to gravitate to the things that feel good as opposed to the things are good, which usually are what your parents are telling you. And they're the most uncool people on earth. So run from that, and I think it really started to hit me when my mental health tanked. And I actually was hospitalized the first time before I was even 21. I think I was 20 years old, and I was hospitalized for mental health issues for a suicide attempt. And that's when it was like, okay, well, maybe drinking is a problem. But I was so hesitant to even admit that, like to myself especially. I know I admit it to the people around me because I backed myself into a corner by getting a handle on my mental health. So then I realized, which I think is something that addicts do and never get rid of, is the ability to manipulate. It's just a matter of, now that I'm sober, I manipulate in a very positive way. So it produces positive results for myself and the people around me. But back then it was like, oh, I'm seeing all this go on, and how do I get what I want without change? So that first hospitalization was when I was like, okay, maybe drinking is a problem.
Were you actually checked into a facility where you had to stay?
Yes. Yeah,
I
I
can
think
relate. Was that very scary for you? Because it was very scary for me.
so. The first time I've been hospitalized 4 times. Thankfully each time was a little bit better than the last, which I think had to do with the facility and my willingness to be there. The first place that I was at was terrifying. And it was, I mean, I somehow have gotten by ever having legal issues or being arrested or anything, but I imagine that's what prison feels like. And it was terrifying because of seeing how they were treating everybody. And I instantly had to become smarter than everybody around me. And thankfully, even though I was not in a position to have anybody listen to me, my parents were very receptive when I would have my phone calls. And like, I remember saying, because my mom one time said, "Are you okay?" Because all my phone calls, I was like so happy and it seemed like everything was fine. And I remember whispering to her on the phone, I said, "I have to act okay, otherwise they'll drug me." And
Yeah. Yep.
in in looking back, it's like I thought I still was in the mentality of like I'm the smartest person in the room. But the sad part about that experience and that hospitalization was I had to just survive it. And that took away the focus on why I actually needed to be there. So
That is
needless to
so
say,
relatable. Yeah.
stay didn't do much.
You mentioned off the top, this is now your third time being sober, and the first. This is also the first time that you chose to do it on your own. So that first time when you got sober, was it because you didn't have any other choice because you were hospitalized, or what was the reasoning the first time around?
It definitely was because I didn't have any other choice because I was hospitalized. I don't remember craving alcohol when I was hospitalized. Like I didn't really realize that I was missing out on anything. It's had outwardly addressed that I knew I shouldn't be drinking. But I think it was a manipulation tactic to try to ease myself back into my life as quickly as possible upon getting. So it's like I had to convince my parents I was okay, my sister, my friends, and my family, like it's all good. I'm fine. Um, but yeah, I honestly, I think I just went through the motions back then because I remember going to AA with my uncle a couple times, and in my head I was like, "This is a cult," um, and I want nothing to do with it. And I didn't do anything to stay sober. I just think I lucky getting sober for 2 years. Um, and then near the tail end of that, I started to think like I think that's when my brain really started to work a little bit better and say, uh, well, I want drinking back in my life. I need to figure out why it was a problem before. And if I do that, then I beat it, I can drink. And that didn't work. Surprise. So then I chose to relapse. It wasn't like in a bad environment or anything like that. It was a conscious decision, and
I
I
mean,
drank for 10 months. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say you hear that though a lot for, especially with something like alcohol that's legal, that's socially acceptable, that is even, considered like a celebratory thing to imbibe,
Yeah.
that
Super easy to
people
get.
get this right. People get this sense, especially when it comes to alcohol addiction too, that if they're not, fiending for it or having to put it in their morning coffee, that they are not a real alcoholic. And then, maybe they can incorporate it back in their lives again.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting. That's, because with so many other things, there's this idea that abstinence, because the thing itself is bad. But when we live in a culture, like, would you say that you felt influenced because it was also all around, or was there any sense of like missing out? Or do you think this was all just more of a personal desire because you missed what you had? Or
So I will say, up until this past time that I got sober, I was the poster child for FOMO, fear of missing out. I mean, I made sure I've never been like a scheduler. I kind of just fly by the seat of my pants and everything. I don't plan for much, but I thought it was like a personality trait to have FOMO. Um, I would schedule my drinking so meticulously. Like it's insane to look back and I'm like, if I would have applied that energy into things that, were beneficial to my health and well-being in a different place, but I wouldn't have as cool of stories. So,
and
yeah,
you learned, right?
yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest part, of course.
So is alcohol, like, not to skip ahead to the end, but so is alcohol, is that like your, quote, drug of choice, or were there like other substances that started to eat in?
So I will say something that I've always kind of stood against is the assumption that if you're addicted to one thing, you're addicted to everything. For me in particular, which I had medical proof, my body metabolizes drugs faster than alcohol. I don't know the science behind it, but found out when I had my son, and it was devastating news when my epidural ran out. But
Oh,
yeah, so alcohol for me was the, I mean that would be my demise because it was a cover up. It was a coping mechanism. I think early, maybe even before I turned 20 or 21, I had done cocaine before, and then it was like came in waves. I It was a habit for sure. I don't really think I even acknowledged fact until relatively recently in my life because because I know like I never sold things in order to get drugs. It was like if it was around or if I had the money. But also when I look back and I real with myself, I'm like the amount of money I spent on drugs is I don't know, and I don't ever want to know. I don't ever want to look back on my bank records. I'm just real glad that green juice is my splurge these days. So
me, it's fizzy water. Obsessed with fizzy
yeah.
water.
So quickly, second time around, like you said, you chose to relapse. You went right back into drinking again. You experimented with some other stuff, and then what brought you? Obviously, we talked about in the beginning. The second time wasn't really by choice either. So why the second time? What happened there that you were like, I had? Was it basically
So
hospitalization required again?
it was kind of I was on the cusp of taking full responsibility for myself, but I wasn't there yet. The second time when I got sober, I put myself into a corner again. I actually remember I was supposed to sing at church, and the night before I went out, and it was a wild night, and my phone died. I didn't wake up for church. I was at a stranger's house, and I remember once I got my phone charged, I called my friend who I best friend from college, and I said, "You need to meet at my apartment because I know my mom's gonna be there, and I'm ready to be honest," which was a lot. But I thought once again I was very strategic about it, and as long as I had backup and somebody there to protect me from my mother, I could talk my way out of it. So once again, I like admitted that alcohol was a problem and got sober. But it still wasn't like I hear so much, people in recovery that you surrender. And I think it has to be a full surrender of your entire self to every single thing in your life and that exists around you. At the time, thought I could be strategic with my surrendering, and that once again proved to not be how it works, at least for me. Because the one thing I want to say too, I think it's really important to take the time to understand and recognize people's journeys, especially when it comes to addiction and sobriety, because everybody's life is different, everybody's journey is different, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another person. And I know that second time I got sober, it was still in this mentality of, FOMO. I'm a very social person. I love music. I love being around people. So I put things in place to help me stay sober. And one of them was the bar that I always went to. I was close with the owners and the staff. And I said, listen, if I am here, don't let any of your bartenders serve me. And it was weird to find community in that, considering, drinking was a problem. But my real problem was me drinking alone. Because it's like if I'm at my apartment, I can run to the liquor store and grab a fifth and go sit on my couch and drink the whole thing, and nobody knows.
Mhm.
So for me, it became, well, I want to be a social person still, but I don't want to drink. So really, the place for me in times of trouble was being at a bar. Really messed up mentality, but it worked for a while.
So,
Right, but I get it
s-
too because
oh,
again, it goes back to that like it's socially acceptable. And as somebody who also has pretty intense FOMO, like I understand that desire where it's your addiction or your habit, it's so intertwined with these other things. So it's easy to either ignore or justify.
I think for me too, being that like I started so young and you like knowing from my own experience and also my education, learning about, human development, we don't you there's some smart kids out there, but we do not know ourselves in our teenage years. So for me to literally put the any potential growth as a human being in those very formative years, it was like I also was clinging to alcohol because it was sort of an identity. And being that I didn't have an identity established prior to drinking, it was like, well, if I lose this, I lose who I am. And plus also like seeing it around and, and worrying that, well, look, everybody else can have a glass of wine with dinner or even go out to the bar and have a few drinks and get a buzz. I don't want to be somebody who isn't able to do. So not only did I have FOMO of like outside situations like, oh, I want to go to this party or I want to go to that bar, but like, internally it was like, well, who would I be, if I didn't have this?
I was gonna say really quick because
Go
I
down.
just tying back to what Leah said about the comment about how the bar was kind of your safe space, and that was super messed up when you think about it. Kind of breaking the fourth wall here for a minute. So when my wife and I were first, before we even married, when we first got together, the first time I ever went and visited Leah and her family, my wife had kind of given me a little bit of a backstory of Leah's situation and how she was a sober person now and whatnot, and I was still relatively new to the industry as far as my time working in it. So at the time, it was very I had a very, I guess you could say, closed-minded brain as far as, like, there's only one right way to do things, and there's so, literally, like, the first night we were all there and we were all hanging out, like, Leah was like, "Let's go to the bar," and in my head, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, we can't go do this, like, it doesn't work like that, and then I very, very quickly learned and realized, no, actually, it can work like this. You can actually still go do those things, but so, it's just funny when you said messed up it is. That was my initial thought because we're talking 5, 6 years ago at this point. And I was like, no,
Yeah.
there's only one way. And you basically have to avoid these. Like you can't just go to a bar as a sober person. Like you can't just do this, but you very, very much can. And I know that Jess and I have talked in previous episodes about it's whatever makes you happy and whatever works for you. And no one should judge that. And at the time I was very judgy about it. I'm like, this isn't something you can do. And yeah, so
Well, I didn't
you
feel
very
it,
much
so
can.
thank you. You're like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, it's like, "No, we're going to a bar and you're driving us there?" Like, "No, this doesn't no, you can't go to a bar."
think for me too, part of it, once I was sober, like I tried to begin to change my mentality because I started to realize like these things about myself that I look at as not being good. Our mentality usually is, I want to get rid of. But what I've learned to realize is like we don't get rid of any of it. We just have to learn how to switch it to work in our favor, really. And I think with me wanting to stay in that scene, in the bar scene, in nightlife, was feeling in control of something. So it's like, okay, well, I know that my friends are going to get places safely. No, I- because with addiction, it's so rooted in control. You don't have control over the things around you. So you grab a bottle or buy drugs or whatever, or you have sex or whatever it may be. And that's what feels comfortable. So I began at that time to start to like tweak my mentality and say, okay, well, I can still have control. It just can be in ways that aren't a detriment to my existence. So
So would you say like in throughout your addiction, and this is getting a little personal, were you the kind of drinker that there were situations you were putting in yourself into that were unsafe, or were you just like getting, too drunk and causing like social issues? Like at what point would you say there was that line where it was getting problematic in your behavior? Like what were the flags?
I feel like there were phases for me, especially because I've gotten sober and then relapsed. And also, being different ages and around different groups of friends and things like that. For me, there was a period of time where alcohol made me just violent and angry. I've been dragged out of bars. Um, and there was other times where I was so that girl that was like crying in the corner at a party, cute. And then, I was just overly dramatic. That was another phase. And then the last phase before I got sober, which was during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, that was just like outrageous party phase, out of control from the moment I woke up to the time I went to bed. If I went to bed for days, and really when I look back, period of time was definitely the worst of my drinking, but it wasn't rooted in I'm drinking my feelings. It was literally like I have all the time on my hands because I'm not working. The world is shut down. What better to do than all the drugs and all the alcohol?
Yep.
And I was surrounded, all of my friends were off work. So it was that, especially, I honestly feel it was more, suffocating. And when I started drinking early on, even though I had a lot of people around me then that were drinking too, it was just like 0 to 100 real quick.
So then what was your, because I don't like to call it rock bottom, because exactly to your point earlier, it's going to look different for different people. And it's not necessarily a rock bottom that creates that aha moment for people. So what was the moment when you just, the sky parted and you're like, wait a minute.
So it was 4 days before Thanksgiving 2020. And so I got sober on November 14th of 2020. And the night before I was not sober in the slightest. And I woke up and was like, if you keep doing this, you're not going to be here. And it wasn't at that point, it was not even about alcohol. It was more so everything else that came with it. Because drinking, it is a miracle. And I am so grateful that I woke up when I did, because I've driven drunk way too many times. Blackout. Like I would get calls from my friends the next morning and say, oh, did you make it home safe? And I thought somebody else drove me home. So I was a danger to myself and to so many others. And it got to the point when I looked at myself and was just like, you're going to die if you keep this up. And it probably won't even be from alcohol. It'll just be because you're so mentally ill and you're not doing anything at all to help yourself. And so at that point, I was honest with my parents about, getting sober, but more so really wanting to get my mental health back on track. On of my excessive drinking and drug use in 2020, I also had six or eight surgeries, I think. I had foot surgery. So that, all the anesthetic and out of surgery, painkillers, everything like that, it was, I like saying it out loud. I'm like, holy crap. Yeah, it was all just too much. And
It was your chaos era,
yeah,
essentially.
and for me, it just came down to one thing that like I need to get my mental health stable. Otherwise I'm not going to be here. And honestly, I have a 7-year-old son, and he's absolutely the light of my life. But he was not my me knowing what I had to do for myself was the driving force. He was secondary to that because it was like he's been around for this many years and I still haven't gotten it together. Like I can't look to my child to save me. I literally have to save myself. So I had called my doctor and asked to get back on medication. I've really familiarized myself with pharmaceuticals and how they help or hurt different mental illnesses and things like that. So I said, this is what I need. And he says, I want to try something different. And I know how that goes. And even though I know what's best for me, you got to do what the doctors say. And he gave me, he prescribed a medication. I had looked it up beforehand. And when I took it, I mean, I instantaneously became a zombie. I didn't leave the couch for 7 days. And thankfully, I was like being so honest with my parents. So they were scared, but there was communication at least. And it got to the point where I said, listen, I, I, I remember actually my mom was in the kitchen cooking and I was sitting on the couch and I was like in zombie mode and I just started laughing uncontrollably. And she came over to me and she said, what's wrong? And I said, I just feel like throwing myself off of a bridge and laughing on the way down. And I realized like, that's not normal. So I got back on the phone with my doctor and I said, if you don't prescribe the medication that I know will work for me, I don't think I'm going to be here tomorrow. And he did, thankfully. And within it, I wasn't back to normal by any means, but I felt okay. So that was like the starting point for me to really just truly take everything a day at a time. I couldn't even get ahead of myself and be like, oh, now I'm better, because that's what I thought every other time. And it really forced me like, I got to take this truly a day at a time and figure it out as I go, because I've done this before and those times didn't work. So now I have an opportunity to do something different that will actually work for me.
What else has been different about this time? Have there been like new like coping mechanisms or even hobbies or anything that you've incorporated or anything like that?
So in recent months, yes, I will backtrack a little bit to when I was sober this last time, 2.5 years ago. I found myself in a relationship of sorts, and I now understand why it is widely known when you get sober that you should not be in a relationship. I thought that I could find a loophole in that because, well, this is my 3rd time getting sober, right? So I'm smarter and I can skip the steps. And that, I think in a way I used as a coping mechanism to not address certain things within myself. Because even though I got sober, there was still a lot that I wasn't ready to like uncover and really deal with. But as I mean, working out, honestly, that was something I threw myself into right away. So the gym has helped immensely. And it's especially too, so I will say about me going back on medication, I think I was only on it for about 6 months after I got sober. And because I just had such an awareness of how it made me feel, got to the point that I was like, okay, I know, basic science. For one, as we age, our hormones change. And obviously I'm sober. I've been sober 6 months. So there's going to be some things in me that changed. And it just got to the point where I was noticing that the medication was starting to make me feel bad again. So I talked with my doctor, I talked with my family, and I got off of it. And I haven't been on any pharmaceutical medication for about 2 years. And with that also, I was in school, so I was working on my degree in psychology. So that definitely took up a lot of my time. Working, obviously my son.
So keeping busy, a
Yeah.
lot was really helpful. Gave you other
Yeah.
things to throw yourself into. And then would you say also that the knowledge of these are my commitment kind of also helped you, stay on the right track kind of thing?
I honestly don't think so. And the reason I say that is because the relationship that I was in, it actually ended last last August or September. And that really made me look at myself the deepest I've ever looked at myself because and I don't want to I don't mean it rudely towards that person as a coping mechanism because he was not that for me. It was meaningful. But looking back, I see that I did use that in a way to face, things within myself. So once that was gone, it was like, okay, now I just have to stand in front of myself in the mirror and stop thinking I'm smarter and just truly surrender to everything. And it's wild to me because even though I was sober prior to then, I started a 12-step program when that relationship ended.
Wow.
And I threw myself into it because yeah, once again, it was just stop running, stop trying to cover anything up. You think I had some tough talks with myself and it's you use alcohol as your excuse because you haven't had that in your life. And now look at what's going on. And it was definitely a test, obviously, because looking back at how that relationship ending affected me, I don't know how I stayed sober. I mean, I do. I can explain it, but just glimpsing at it, I'm like, holy crap, man.
Right.
How did I do
I think
that?
it's I think it's a-okay to be impressed with yourself, when you look back
Yeah.
and you're like, I did that. I got through
Yeah.
that. And logically we know how we did it. But yeah, there are times where I've looked back too that you're like, I'm honestly stunned that I
Yeah.
was able to do that.
I do it a lot. I honestly try to be frequent about giving myself pats on the back, not outwardly, but the other day I had a moment with something and I looked myself in the mirror and I said, don't forget who you are. And I said it a few times, out loud. And sometimes I get a little nasty with myself. Sometimes, when I flip back in my journaling, I'm like, wow, you were really mean to you that day. Because it's necessary. So
That's totally fair. So you're a journaler too?
that was something else that I picked up. So really, I mean, dove right into journaling. I did a 40 days self-love program. And because I've realized, especially with being sober, we have these things that we did when we weren't sober and it became habit and then it became comfortable. And to go from, for me, drinking excess and every day and drugs and partying to literally just cutting that off. You can't just cut it off and then think that that's going to work. So I had to, implement these things and just do a 180 with myself. So it was I reached out, to friends that I knew that meditated and I did research and I started reading a lot and just immersing myself in knowledge because it's great to have a support system, but the one thing I've definitely realized with my sobriety and when I wasn't sober is you can have people around you that love you that would take a bullet for you, but it's really hard to relate to people living their lives in a way that is so drastically different than your own. And you cannot sit there and expect somebody else to live the life you're living. You may have their problems, and yeah, maybe they should be sober. Maybe they shouldn't do what they're doing, but they definitely should not be doing what you're doing. And accepting that and realizing that my own, but not in a rude to other people way, because I don't want to discount any of the support that I've received. People have supported me to the best of their ability, and I'm always going to be grateful for that. And I think that that's what's also helped me stay sober is breaking down that barrier of resentment, huge, and
Mm.
understanding that no matter who I resent, what I resent, I guarantee it's all going to come back to me, in one way or another. So that's really helped me as well.
I love that. Like, did you find, because, drinking is such a social thing, did you find that you lost friends or gained friends outside of that scope, like that you were, that you became closer with because of that? I mean, what did that look like for you?
So that has been honestly one of the most mind-blowing things to me is my group of friends. I have, on top of my bipolar diagnosis, I also have borderline personality disorder, which just basically has a lot to do with being able to maintain healthy relationships. So I have had so many different friends over the years. But with this last time that I got sober, I was scared of losing my friends, but at that point I didn't care because I couldn't lose myself. And
Right.
it
Yeah.
felt
If you have to choose, like,
oh
sorry,
yeah.
it's going to be me in
Yeah,
this.
and I
Yeah.
fell off the map for honestly I think I didn't see the majority of my group of friends for about 2 years. I kept in touch with certain ones. I have to s and I especially thought I was gonna lose them all because they were all in that party scene. And not to say that, like, they're adults, they take care of their responsibilities. They didn't have the problem that I had. Um, but I didn't lose them. And when I came back, I think the first time I saw, like, a majority of them was just back in February. And granted, they didn't recognize me. They were stunned to see me, but the best part is that these people have accepted me. They accepted me back then when I was a train wreck, and they were genuinely there for me. Even though some people could say, "Oh, well, they were enabling you." Well, it's not. I'm 30 something years old. Like, I'm responsible for myself, but they have all lived their lives the way they do, and they accept me now where I'm at, and they're supportive. It's not just like, "Oh, we accept that Leah's sober." I mean, they're just the most genuinely supportive people I've ever had in my life. And we can go weeks without talking, we can go months without talking, but they're there for me and I'm there for them. And I think that's something that definitely comes with age on top of being sober. It's like just the acceptance of everybody that comes into your life or even walks out, because I'm just in a really good place now where I understand even the people that had to walk out, it had nothing to do with me. It wasn't against me, and looking at myself and doing the work to get myself to where I'm at has helped me be a lot more compassionate towards the people that, are no longer in my life. And that even though at the time I felt like you're doing this against me, you're doing this to hurt me. Like, well, no, like, Leah, look at yourself. Look what you did. You left a
Right.
trail of disaster.
What would you say if you had to choose, like, besides just, getting sober, what is something that you would say is one of your proudest accomplishments throughout this process?
So this is a very specific one. I might cry. I'm thinking
It's
about
okay. We
this.
like
So,
tears.
oh my gosh, I'm surprised I haven't cried yet. Let's just be honest. This is record time for me. So I think my proudest accomplishment, specific to my sobriety and mental health, a class that I was taking at the same actually began the week that I got broken up with, and I can't remember exactly what the class was, but my classes are 8 weeks, and they introduced the final project in the first week. So the project, it had to do with counseling theories. So there was counseling theories that you'd learn throughout the course. You had to, final project was create a hypothetical case study and choose one of the counseling techniques to come up with a counseling plan, and explain how this is going to help this person. So one thing
Cool.
I've noticed about myself is I no longer think I'm the smartest person in the room. I prefer to be, but I
It's a lot
do.
of pressure to put on yourself, first of all.
Yeah, I love being wrong now. Like, somebody prove me wrong because then I get to learn. But I still have the tendency of, like, wanting to challenge myself just to see how smart I am. This probably sounds really cocky saying it out
I don't think so.
loud.
Because it comes down to, again, a self challenge. And
Yeah.
to me,
So
that's a question mark, not an
yeah.
exclamation point,
So I told myself, being that I was already immersing myself in, like, the self-love journey and really, challenging myself to grow, I decided that I was going to do the hypothetical case study on myself, change the names, and then I was going to choose a technique that I have never, done in therapy, that I know nothing about, and try to come up with treatment plan for myself and present this as my final project. And my
What
thought
therapy
process,
did you choose? Sorry to cut you off. What
um,
therapy?
what therapy did I choose? Well, spoiler alert, I didn't do the project.
Oh,
So,
sorry. Okay. Okay.
what ended up happening was um existential therapy. That's what it was. So very, and even though I'd never done that therapy technique with a professional before, I was sort of exploring, through meditation, through, reading different type psychotherapy techniques and things like that on my own. So, I was dealing with the breakup, and then uncle passed away suddenly, 2 days after Thanksgiving. And I had times previously in school where I fell behind and I didn't do the right thing by going to my professor and saying, hey, listen, this life happened. Can I get an extension? So I wanted to, the same mistake. So I asked for an extension on an assignment. The following week, we had our aunt who passed away. So asked for an extension that, and then just, both of those deaths in the family suddenly, on top of what I was going through with the breakup, it was like the entire world was just crumbling on me, but I
Yeah.
wasn't going to give, and I wasn't going to, I was really going to try my hardest to get through that class. But I didn't want to ask for any more extensions because I was like, she's not going to believe me. Like, too many people are dying. And she's at some point going to be like, get it together and make up more original, requests for extensions. So it got to the night before the project was due. And I had been working on it just because the way the class is set up, you do a little each week. But I just got to the point that I'm like, I can't do this. So I turned in what I had completed, and I wrote my professor a letter and explained, for one, that I was not lying, asking for extensions, but also just presented what I was going through in my life, not as a sob story, because it's not a sob story. I mean, everybody has stuff that they're going through that's difficult. But I just wanted to be honest with the fact that, I put some effort forth, but appreciated her understanding throughout the course. And I also appreciated her commitment to me as her student, and that I understood that I probably wouldn't pass the class and that I'd have to re-enroll. And I was, accepting of it all. And she gave me 100%. And she wrote me a letter back and said that what I presented as the takeaway was far more valuable than any of the coursework that had been presented. I remember, like, I got
That's making me emotional.
yeah.
Like, that's beautiful.
I
Wow.
was honestly, like, I was hysterical. I remember I got the grade. I was up in my room, and my mom was out, but my dad was home, and I come barreling down the stairs, bawling my eyes out. And he, of course, thinks like the world is ending again because Leah's been having a rough go. And I read it to him, and he's like, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "Because it's like that was the biggest like hug that I received from a complete stranger." And it was just validation that I can trust myself, because that's something I think we lose too with addiction, is the ability to trust ourselves. And the longer it goes on, like, you have to realize that even if you stop, like, if you've been an addict for 20 years, like, you can't just reverse all that. So no matter what, it's going to take time. And that for me was like the moment I could say to myself, you know what you're doing. You can trust yourself. You don't need all these voices around you. You know exactly what's meant for you and how to get. So that
And to
was,
be
yeah,
so seen in that way, that's just
yeah,
really incredible.
yeah.
Do you still
So,
have that email?
oh
Did
yeah.
you keep it?
And I even told her, I was like, because it was right before that class fell right before Christmas break. So Christmas break, you get 2 weeks off. And I told her, I was like, I will finish this paper and submit it to you. She's, the only thing you need to do is nothing. Like, you just need to be with yourself, be with your family, take care of yourself, please. And yeah, so that was, that was monumental.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
How do you follow that up, honestly? Like, well, I would say the only other thing I really was wanting to ask you is, you really seem like someone that, like you mentioned, that you're very self-aware. Um, but what if you could go back and tell younger you something, any version or any period, which Leah would it be, and what would you tell her?
So I think that it's going to sound cliche. and I'm going to preface it by saying I've read this in so many books. I've heard so many other people in recovery say this, and not even recovery, but just people who struggle with like, mental health, and they always refer back to their younger self, their childlike self. And I I don't like I take that back. I love cliches now because I can't avoid them and they're very true. But for a while I was like digging my heels and like, I don't it just sounds so unoriginal, you know? But with taking up journaling and meditation, I remember specifically um a few weeks after my breakup, I wrote myself a letter and I have it in my pink notebook and I could probably find the page real easily, but I wrote myself a letter to young Leah. It was just it basically said 2 things. It said, "I've got good news and bad news. Um, life is gonna be really tough, but you are absolutely 1,000,000% going to make it through. The best way to make it through is to just accept and understand that you're gonna make it through and need to know how and not need to know every, occurrence that's gonna happen that's gonna get you to where you wanna go." I really yeah, I think by writing that letter to myself and talking to myself as a young child, like as far back as I can remember, because there's a lot of things that have happened in my life that I used to look at as that wasn't fair, and it wasn't. There's so many things that were completely not fair and that I should have never had to go through. But if I'm sitting here as an adult saying I shouldn't have had to go through that, it does not change that I went through it. So I've really kind of catapulted myself into being a kid again because it's one thing to talk to my younger self. But I think for me, what's helped is like really being a kid again, like understanding you got to be an adult because you have responsibilities, but because you take care of your responsibilities, you can actually give yourself that life you felt you missed out. And the really beautiful thing in thinking that way is it relieves everybody else around me of their responsibility to, do anything to make me feel better. Because I think too with addiction and recovery, it's we look at the people that have wronged us, and there's always a sense of comfort in placing some sort of blame on somebody else. So it's like, oh well, my parents, oh well, my boyfriend, oh well, this friend. And it's like, no, relieve everybody of that because they're hurting too. Maybe it's not projected outwardly like a drunk slob the way I did, but they're dealing with stuff too. And yeah, so that's really helped me in that
I
way.
mean, it's a cliche, but like you, I also enjoy cliches. Hurt people hurt people. And like realizing that, I just think is phenomenally helpful wherever you're at in your life or whoever you are, just that acknowledgement, that
Oh
it's
yeah.
not necessarily about you. It's just people are out here being a human is hard.
Yeah. It's
People are out
really
here doing their best.
it is. I have recognized though that as I find that compassion in myself for others, it also makes me see that life doesn't have to be hard and it's actually quite simple. Once we like unpack all of our stuff to
Yeah.
show ourselves, it's like we're all messed up. So like let's just all hang and talk about it, figure it out and discuss it. And I don't need to point my finger at you and say, well, you're messed up. Like we literally
Duh.
all
We're all messed up. Yep, for sure. So if you're listening to this, we get you.
you're messed up too.
Yep. You
We're
can sit
all
with
messed
us.
up in this together.
Well, I mean, thank you, first of all, so much for being willing to be so
Absolutely.
open. I feel like this has just been a really incredible conversation. I've learned a lot.
I've got a couple uh, questions on the way out here. I was kind of
Oh yeah.
sitting back, taking some notes of everything. So a
Oh
couple
yeah.
callbacks to some
Love
things you
that.
touched on. So first off, I know on this show, Jess and I try to make a point to misconceptions, stigmas. We try to get rid of those and set the record straight. So for unfortunately, a big one that is still out there is a lot of people hear or think of relapse and they say that's a failure. It's not a failure. Relapse is not a failure. So as someone who has relapsed twice now, what would you kind of say to set the record straight to somebody who still might say to themselves or say it about somebody else they know, well, you relapse, that means you failed?
So I kind of have like a three-part answer. Um, First of all, to anybody who is listening that either is in act addiction or long recovery or short recovery, the time doesn't matter. If you're sober for that's a day more than you're not. If you're sober for 3 months, like I see a lot, especially on social media with people who, talk about their sobriety. Well, I'm only 3 months in. And it's like, no, like it's only, you have woken up for 90 days in a row and made the conscious decision to stay sober. That's
Yeah.
huge. And I don't even care if it's 3 days and then say you have a drink or you use, like you still, it's building blocks. So I think it's really, I would say to people, like, look at it as building blocks. I actually just heard an analogy recently, like when you're learning to ride a bike, once you learn, nobody comes back and says, well, how many times did you fall? You're riding the bike. So it's like, today I'm sober. That is an accomplishment. It
That's a
really
great
doesn't
analogy.
matter how many days I have behind me. Another thing too, I will add. So there was one point in time, I think it was last year. So the relationship that I was in, we had always gone to the same restaurant. We usually sat at the bar. The bartender knew us. It was a really busy night. He ordered a drink. I ordered a Red Bull, and she gave it to me in a glass. And I honestly just thought that it was like a nice gesture to put it in a glass. And I took a sip, and there was vodka in it. I remember in that moment, like this wave came over me, and I was really grateful for it, honestly, because it was like, okay, for one, I was with somebody that I could trust, that I felt safe with. Mm. And he looked at me at that moment and he's like, that has vodka in it, doesn't it? I didn't know what to do. So I spit it back, but I didn't get ahead of myself. I didn't have a breakdown. Also didn't feel like I relapsed. I didn't feel overwhelmed with sadness because it was like, for one, it wasn't a conscious decision. But let's
Right.
say even if it was, I think in those conscious decisions, that's when we need to be the most gentle with ourselves because we are human beings. And whether it's a drink or even if like you are on a diet, but then you caved and had 16 Oreos, whatever, once again, you're not going to get hung up on how many times you fell off the bike. It's just the fact that you're riding it. So that I think is like the biggest thing to break the stigma that time doesn't really matter. It's the effort you put forth and it's the choice that you consciously make every single day.
That's amazing. I love that.
So that's actually interesting because that kind of almost ties into my next question. So with all the work that you've done for yourself over the years, the introspection, the learning about yourself, the evolving that you've done, do you ever sometimes, not necessarily literally wake up one day, but do you ever just wake up sometimes and just say to yourself, I wonder if I could just have a drink and just have that one now and move on and everything will be fine? Or do you think to yourself, I can never ever go back?
So I definitely thought that a lot after the first two times I got sober. I haven't thought that exact thought at all this last time because I've just really accepted that for me, like I'm a very determined person. I'm very stubborn. And I know that I could use that stubbornness in a way that would allow me to, say, have a glass of wine with dinner or have a drink. I know that I could do it, but I look at what would be the purpose. Um, there's a small part of me that is like, I have all this time under my belt. Like, why would I throw that away, essentially? But honestly, is more like, there's nothing beneficial for my life to justify, having like I'm not a wine connoisseur. I can't even eat red meat. So it's not like there's any for me with my life, if I was to try to drink again, it would be such a blatant disregard and like for everything I stand for, honestly. But I don't I think that everybody's journey is their own. And if somebody else ever was sober and then chose not to, my only interest would be getting to know them and understand them to see how they work. Cause it's really interesting to me to understand how other people's brains work and their behavior and things like that. So I wouldn't look down upon another person for doing it, but for me, it's a lifelong thing. And it's gotten to the point where I'm like, I'm so proud of myself. I'm yeah, I'm just like, I'm really proud of myself. And I don't know if I would not be proud of myself if I drink again, but it's too risky to like chance.
I not to because I don't ever want to seem like I'm trying to talk about me or whatever, but
Oh
just
no, you're
it's
fine.
how I relate. Um, Obviously my story is very different, but I've found, and maybe you find this too, that at this stage, like I am of the mindset that I know that I can drink if I want to. I don't have that same struggle necessarily, but there's a part of me that's like I am enjoying so much the fact that I stopped and that I don't feel like I need alcohol anymore, that I almost stubbornly don't want it.
Yeah.
Where even if I know I could have it, I'm just kind of like, you know what? I just don't want it though.
Yeah.
Because I think the feeling of what I've accomplished from quitting and moving on and being able to not feel like I need alcohol, to me, that is almost more intoxicating than how I used to feel when I drank. It's like
Yeah.
it's just a better feeling now. And I don't know if that's similar for you.
Absolutely. It really is. And another thing to that is with my mental health diagnosis is specifically borderline personality disorder and the fact that, I have these really huge parts of my life that we kind of all competed with each other between alcoholism and then mental illness and eating disorders and all these different things. But for me, upon getting sober, I really addressed my BPD diagnosis and recognized like I don't have any healthy relationships in my life. That is the one thing I desire most is a connection with people, not just one person, but to have the ability to connect with people. And that's a huge thing for me with alcohol and drugs is like I can connect with people in the way that's fulfilling to me and in a way that's going to be positive for others if I have drugs and alcohol in my system. So I think honestly, in some ways, that's been more of a driving force. And then just being able to have a daily visualization of what's important in my life that keeps going in a positive direction, which at the top of the list is always going to be my sobriety, going to be my son. And, as long as I have sobriety at the top of that list, I am seeing in real time in my life, everything is working. And it is intoxicating, like you said, but for me, it's a very calm excitement. And that's how I know for me it's different because in the past, there was excitement meant like giddy and
It's
party
like
and
chaos excitement.
yeah. And now
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm so calmly excited and I see the puzzle pieces falling where they need to. And like, especially now, the relationships that I have in my life, the relationship I have with my son is improving. The relationship that I have with his dad and his girlfriend is improving. The relationship I have with my parents and my sister and like every single person around me, and having somebody wonderful come into my life recently that is also sober that I get to learn new things with. So I just, I know that it's a combination of choices that I've made, but I absolutely million% attribute where I'm at now in life and where I will continue to go to being sober.
So I've got one last thing that we'll get out on kind of a fun, lighthearted note here. So in a
Okay.
previous episode, Jess and I spent a lot of time talking about music festivals and the sober experience at music festivals. So Jess and I aren't actively in that scene. We spent a lot of time talking about it, but neither of us are actually do it. You are somebody that is very active in the music festival scene. You are also somebody that is very much sober. So I thought maybe you could share with us your personal experiences of being a sober person in the music festival scene.
So I love all music, but I think that there is something to be said for the electronic music scene and the community
Yes.
because it is every single different type of person, earth, all coming together as one. And it doesn't matter what state you're in, it doesn't matter what fest. I've been to Electric Forest is the festival I've gone to a few times. I went to Breakaway a couple of years ago. But I spent so much time, in the nightclubs, mm, after hours even, and granted that environment would not recommend, but the community with absolutely. And I think that that's why I still like gravitate toward the I'm tired now, so I don't go as much. If there was like afternoon raves, I'd be there. Um,
Yes, same.
but yeah,
With
just
snacks instead of
oh yeah,
drugs and alcohol. Like,
absolutely.
oh my God, mozzarella sticks. Yeah.
Oh, island noodles. But going to a music festival, like for me, the first time I ever went, I actually was drinking, but I've been 3, 4 times after that, and I've been sober. And each time it's been more life changing. And I think it's just the acceptance, like it's kind of like a weird thing to promote because there's also the drug culture with it, you know? But I think I personally see that there's so much it's going towards a direction of being able to be sober and realize like you can be your true authentic self, whoever you are, whatever your job is, whatever your life has looked like, and you can find community with people and stay sober and be supported too. That's a big thing for me because I think with sobriety, like we look to our close circle. So we think our friends, our family, that those are going to be the people that are going to support us in our sobriety. There's a lot of people that don't have that. And, the electronic music scene and festivals, I know with Electric Force, they have sober camping. They have a lot of things having to do with, being only around sober people, which is really great. I know Movement just happened here in Detroit this past weekend. I've never been to Movement, but I'm on some of the Facebook groups. So I see the commentation and, so people are so sober and I don't know. I wonder if I'm like biased because I'm in it, but it's just really beautiful to me to see that type of acceptance among such a huge group of people. Because I mean, when I first worked for us, the first I was carding, IDing people the first day. The first couple that walked up to me were a couple from Australia, and they were there celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. That shocked me because I was like, my knowledge of festivals was party, drugs, alcohol, all the things you shouldn't be doing. And it's an excuse because you're enjoying music. It's honestly it's been the farthest thing from that for me. And the second year that I went, I actually got sober 6 days before I went to Electric Forest. And I remember like sitting with myself and be like, do you really think that this is the best idea? Like, you're going to justify this. You're going, but is this the best idea? And thankfully, that was actually one of the better ideas I've had when not being that hurt.
There's even because I've never been to like a festival or anything, but my sister and I are really into electronic music. Back even when it was techno and like everyone
Yeah,
hated it, we still liked it.
I love it. Yeah.
When it was not cool, now all these kids are doing these festivals. Like, excuse me. Anyway, um, she and I have gone to a bunch of shows, and I wish I could remember which DJ it is, but there is one that we knew of that he was very big on wanting people to enjoy his music sober because he was saying, the experience that you supposedly have, this transcendental experience you supposedly have while on drugs or alcohol, he's like, I'm creating that with my music. You shouldn't need those things. I want you to enjoy it just for what it is
Yeah.
and be with yourself. And I just remember thinking even back then, like, wow, that's so cool that even like one of these big name DJs is supporting sober culture. And that was,
Yeah.
years before I even had issues with alcohol or anything. So, I just even then thought that was very cool. And I think to your point now, that's even becoming more and more common and popular is, people just being like, you don't have to come and do drugs and stuff.
Yeah.
You're here for the experience and that's it.
Another part of that too, with what you said, like the DJ who, was promoting sobriety, basically. I see so many of them, especially because, there's been a few DJs that have gotten sober and you never knew that they weren't. But then when they, announce, hey, this is how it's affecting my life. And I think it's so, for one, it takes such strength, to be able to do that and to be on that platform. Like people are looking up to you and they didn't even know who you were. And now you're saying, this is who I am. That's taking a big chance. People,
True.
in the limelight can lose hands because of something like that. But I think that's why I love electronic music culture too, because it's not just the people like us who are enjoying it, but it's the people putting it out there that are also saying like, you can enjoy life, you can enjoy all the creativity that it has to offer without numbing yourself in one way or another. And the other thing too, which I think is a byproduct of that conversation going on, is the fact that people aren't shaming as much for those who are still using drugs. Like when I went to Electric Forest last year, every corner of every street there was signs with the number to text if you needed a test kit. And as you're walking, you're not hearing anybody, make negative comments. Oh, well, people just shouldn't do drugs. Cause like, no offense, but people are going to. And
People are going to
we're
do
never
what they're
going
going to
to live
do.
in a
Yeah.
world where something is going to be completely eradicated. So we need to educate ourselves and also be accepting towards reality so that we can help people. So, each year as I've gone, I've seen it become more talked about and more of a comfortable conversation piece. And I think that people are doing less drugs because of it, because they realize what they can get out of it. Honestly, the other thing too with having those moments, I have ugly cried at so many sets sober, and it's been some of the most incredible times of my life. I actually was just telling my boyfriend the other day that after my second forest, I gained this incredible forest family. We had, our group chat, and there was one day I was driving home and the sunset was beautiful, and seven on my playlist just randomly came on Seven Lions First Times. You should definitely listen to it because it's emotional. But the sunset, and then thinking about these incredible people that I just truly took on as family. I texted them all. I was like, I am ugly crying to this song driving. Like I should honestly pull over because I was ridiculous. Um, but yeah, and that's, I mean, I'm definitely partial to music and the way it makes you feel. So yeah.
Sure. One last thing,
Yeah.
you had started to mention, that all of this whole thing was like really timely for you. Why?
The biggest obstacle I think I've ever came up against in my life was surprisingly not any issues with addiction, but more so my relationships. And I have never been single for a period of time. I've been engaged 4 times, married twice from 18 to 20. Well, up until my last relationship ended at the end of last year. And when I completely immersed myself into myself, I started to see, things come together. And then I ended up having an emergency back surgery in March, which completely made me feel like every ounce of energy I put towards getting myself to a better place went down the drain. And then I started to get better again, started implementing all those techniques that I was before with journaling and meditating and things like that. And in recent weeks, I'd probably say at the beginning of May was when I really just accepted everything that has happened in my life for exactly what it was, nothing more, nothing less. Honestly detached myself from everything, and not in a bad way, but in a very like therapeutic way to say, I don't have to be defined by anything. I don't have to be attached to anything. And if
Very zen,
yeah.
very zen
So,
philosophy.
yeah. So when I know that I reached out to Dan immediately when you guys started this podcast, and this is the 8th episode. So it's been a minute, since you guys started.
9.
I've been anxiously oh, yeah. So I've been, like, anxiously awaiting the opportunity, but also not bugging the crap out of him because I literally every day I just feel more at peace with everything, like, happening the way it needs to happen. Um, so for me, being in a when he texted me and I was like, "I am in the best headspace that I'm in." Actually, before my last therapy session, I had picked up therapy for about 3 sessions, and then I was like I reminded myself who I was. And my therapist, she's known me for 6 years. She has seen a lot. And she said, I have never seen more clarity in you than I do now. And she said really wonderful things to me throughout the years that definitely I was like, well, thank you. But this was the first time that she said something where I was like, yeah, I know. And so for that, the timing of it all, it was, I'm so this is such a privilege for me and an opportunity for me to be able to share anything about myself with you guys or with anybody else listening. And in order to help people, I truly believe like we have to detach ourselves from things. And especially when you have such a monumental story of like ups and downs, you have to be able to tell it in a way that is like a victimization thing. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I don't, where I'm at in life, nothing has happened to me. I've been through things. I'm not a victim to my circumstances. I'm not a victim to life. I get this opportunity to live. So the timing of this was just like, wow, I really get an opportunity to live by doing this. So thank you guys.
Thank you. It honestly has been such a pleasure. Truly. Okay, well, I love her.
Yeah, no, that was amazing, powerful, remarkable. Any adjective you want to use, I mean,
Honestly.
just this honesty. It just that was, I know on these episodes we tend to try to keep it short, sweet, to the point. That obviously was a lot longer than a normal episode. I don't even mind. Hopefully, all of you are still listening up to this point. I
I
really hope
know.
you are,
I
because
mean,
that
for
was
me,
amazing.
time blew past.
Yeah,
And I looked at the
yeah.
clock at one point and I went, oh no, what happened? But I mean, she's so easy to listen to also.
And just her story. I mean, and not that and everyone's story is unique and everyone's story is great. And any story of sobriety is remarkable and powerful, but hers
Mhm.
particularly, just the fact that this is now her third go of it. Obviously, this so I would think she'd even agree with that. This has been her most successful one, but the fact that she's tried two times previously, she decided to give it a try a third time. She's doing really well with it this time. I think that it takes a lot of strength to try to get sober even one time, let alone to try two more times after the first one didn't work out.
Right, to keep going. And I think that's so important and so valuable to talk about, because when we hear these stories of sobriety, like she said, we don't ask when somebody has learned how to ride a bike, well, how many times did you fall? But we just don't acknowledge with sobriety that oftentimes people do fall, and relapse is a very common part of the process. And it doesn't mean that the person has failed. It doesn't mean that treatment has failed. And it doesn't mean that it's hopeless either. And Leah is a perfect example of that.
And I thought it was interesting too that she mentioned the first time her relapse was essentially by choice, which is interesting too, because it reminds people as well that, once again, we try to eliminate stigmas and misconceptions here. Most people hear relapse and they think, oh, well, you screwed up, you know, you failed or whatever. But in her case, she made a conscious decision to relapse. So it wasn't like her saying, "Oh
Right. It
no, I
wasn't
screwed
like,
up." It was, I want to try again, or I don't want to. So relapse doesn't necessarily mean you screwed up
it
or
was,
it was an
yeah, it was
accidental
with a good
thing.
intention.
Yeah,
Right. It was with good intention. She was making a conscious choice that in her mind, looking back, she knows that wasn't 100% of the case. But, sometimes people, they're able to convince themselves, well, I want to be a responsible drinker. Let me try to do that again. And then, the process of realizing, okay, well, that's obviously not in the cards for me. So let me adjust. So it's not, yeah, to your point, it's not just people being up against a wall or in a hard time. And it's just this like cliff moment, where you just fall off the wagon and you start using or drinking again. Yeah, it looks very different for people.
absolutely. And on that note, we have gone very, very long today. So thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe, rate, review, all the good things that we always tell you to do every time. And of course, we cannot end a show without reminding you that if you or a loved one is struggling with substance abuse, addiction, or mental health, help is always available. If you want to help yourself, people are there that want to help you. And I think Leah's story today uh, definitely reiterates that for everyone out there that did listen. Findtreatment.gov is a great place to find treatment options in your area. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration also has a toll-free helpline where you can speak to someone and they can help you out as well. And that number is 1-800-662-4357. That is 1-800-662-4357. And of course, addictionhelp.com, where you can find all the great work that Jess is doing over there, all the technical terms, all the resource pages, all the help that she is providing, all the valuable information that she is offering to anyone who is interested. But on that note, that will do it for today's show. And I truly, truly thank everyone for listening today. I really hope you all enjoyed it. And we will talk to you guys next week. Have a great week, everybody.